All right, I'm going to go ahead and start off with intros. So good afternoon. I just looked at the time. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shirley Liu, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and we are hosting today's panel webinar. You'll see a couple of other lovely faces on the screen with me. These are our project partners, and they will be the ones speaking with you all today. I will be facilitating. I'll pass it over to them very soon. But just a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. So we do have captioning today. To enable your captioning options, you would find the captioning options at the bottom of your screen. You may have to bring it up with the little ... And then you'll be able to select, your caption size and everything like that. If you're having trouble with captions, or if you're not sure, feel free to send me a chat and I can help you out with that. We are recording the webinar today, and it will be available on our website about a week after today. So feel free to share that with your networks and your colleagues. And throughout the webinar, feel free to put in any questions that you have in the Q&A box. Also, feel free to share any reflections or insights or any resources that you have and you want to share with your fellow participants. Feel free to put that in the chat box as well. We will have a little bit of time at the end of the panel today to address participant questions. So if you put them in the Q&A box, that'll help us keep organized. So very quickly, in case you're not familiar with API-GBV, just a quick introduction. The Asian Pacific Institute, we are a national technical assistance and resource provider and training provider. We do not have any direct services. We provide advocacy, research, resources, training, and technical assistance. Our role is to uplift the importance of culturally specific advocacy, promote practices from our culturally specific direct services programs, working in communities, engage with national organizations to uplift the needs of AAPI survivors and AAPI communities. So I think a lot of you may be familiar with what we do in our work already, so I won't spend too much more time on that. And I really want to get into the content of today. As a webinar. Let me just share, do a small share screen. We don't have a lot of share screen today. And I just want to share our agenda so you have an idea of where we're going today. So I will, after this introduction, I will pass it over to our project partners, and each of them will kind of talk about their individual projects in their communities and share some of the highlights and some of the success stories. An overview of their project, and then we'll go into a kind of a panel Q&A. I'll pose some questions to them and we can learn more about their faith-based advocacy and their work in the communities. Last 10 to 15 minutes we'll reserve for some participant Q&A, so if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the end. And then we'll close out. So very simple, very basic agenda today. So before I pass it over to our faith-based partners, I just want to share maybe a small introduction to, why we're having this project or why we consider it a priority in our communities for AAPI survivors. We've long heard that support from faith leaders and support from your faith community is one of the things that a survivor needs, one of their priorities. And this is true of survivors from all different faith communities and all different, backgrounds. And of course, we've all heard, that spiritual abuse, faith-based abuse can be one of the most severe and the most damaging forms of abuse or tools that an abuser can use. We've also heard that survivors often don't get what they need when they're disclosing abuse to a faith partner. They're pushed back into the relationship, they're not believed, their stories are minimized. Sometimes they may even be publicly shamed in the congregation. And trust with faith leaders can be hard to build, can be something that takes a long time, that needs to be nurtured, kind of like a 1 step forward, 3 steps back type of process. And so, you know, for the last couple of years, API-GBV, we've partnered with amazing community-based organizations and consultants on 3 faith projects that started in California, but have in many ways garnered the attention and interest in other states as well. And, you know, through these few years, they've built, you know, trusting relationships with their local faith communities. They've been able to do trainings, video PSAs, resource guides, toolkits, curricula, just all sorts of great, amazing work with their communities and beyond. So I'm super excited to be having all, you know, the consultants from all 3 projects here with us today. We have Sunny Kim from the Korean American Family Services in Los Angeles, Harmeet Kaur from the Sikh Family Center in the Bay Area, California, and then Ellen Hong and Lee Shun Hong from the LA area, who's been working with Taiwanese and Mandarin speaking churches in that area. So, you know, they will be sharing their work with us with the caveat that, you know, the work looks different in, you know, all communities, and even the same religious community in a different area, you know, their experiences there may be very different, but hopefully you all can learn some amazing things from their work and take that into the work that you're all doing in your communities as well. So I'm going to first pass it to Ellen and Lishun to talk about their work in LA.
Thank you, Shirley, and good afternoon to everybody. It's so fun to be on webinar together, though we can't see you, but we know you can see us. We do look forward to some interaction throughout, even through the Q&A box or the chat function. We are lined up to share back to back about our projects. So if it feels like we're talking a lot, please just intersperse with your questions and comments and thoughts. So I am part of a duo with Lee Shun Hong as my project partner on the work that we're doing with the Institute. And to give you a little background of how we started working with the Institute, it was actually back in the summer of 2019 when I was leaving the DVSA org that I was working at for almost 15 years based in LA. And I was leaving a role that oversaw the community programs. And so a lot of the outreach, the education, work with schools and youth. And prior to that, overseeing 2 of our emergency and transitional shelters. So it was a lot, and I was ready to transition out of that organization, but the Institute had approached our organization to do some work in this faith-based, on this faith-based grant that the Institute had from HHS. And our ED gauged my interest and saw it as a way for me to continue doing work with the organization while leaving my role to focus on this side project in the faith community. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, even though I was a director and part of the core leadership team at this nonprofit, I wasn't your traditional like social work major, though I would say I would characterize myself as having grown up and being steeped in community work within the Taiwanese immigrant community in Los Angeles, because my parents were actually bivocational Taiwanese immigrant ministers. And so, you know, my dad was a pastor, but had a plumber toolbox in one hand. And that's how he, you know, at times was able to feed our family or take care of our family. Other times he took up like part-time work at the post office, working the night shift. My mom was a part-time instructional aide in the public school system. And she had a foray with like selling imported toys from Taiwan at our local swap meet. So like, you know, the picture of like Christian ministers that are portrayed in media of like people who are wearing like Italian suits and silk ties and on top of a like huge, stage with lights and everything. That wasn't my parents. So they were walking alongside indigent Taiwanese families who had recently immigrated to the States. And so their work looked very much like what we would call social work today. They would be helping these families enroll in school. They would be, taking them, interpreting for them. There were cases when, one of the congregants got arrested because they used corporal punishment on their children. And so, my parents are getting a call from the police station because my parents are the only people that this family knew. So my whole life, really, there's not really been a distinction between my faith and community work and social justice are very much integrated and have always been hand in hand. So going back to this opportunity with the Institute and how our project began was when this opportunity arose to work more deeply within faith communities. That was a no-brainer for me because it was the perfect opportunity to join the passions that I have. And, I embody those things. And so as we, begin to flesh out what the project would look like with the Institute, we had thought that it'd be great to write a curriculum that really took a deep dive at looking at the Christian faith that's practiced within the Taiwanese communities, Mandarin-speaking communities as well, and gender-based violence. And so what Li Shun and I did, and the reason why Li Shun was brought onto the project is she's actually my mom, but she's a doctor in ministry, and she's been like decades long a minister, like I told you, a bivocational minister with a lot of experience within immigrant Taiwanese and Chinese communities, not just here in LA, but throughout the country and also internationally. She's also written a couple books too, so on like healthy families and family systems and things like that. So she was also trained as a 65-hour domestic violence and sexual assault counselor through the organization that I was working at in Los Angeles and was one of our volunteers. So it was really a no-brainer for me to bring her on to initially translate the curriculum that she and I would be writing. But as it turned out, as we began to do this work together, she was really more of a partner and not a translator. So she came on as a consultant as well, and a really critical one. So as we began to write this curriculum initially in the summer of 2019, what we had to do was really take a deep dive, like I said, into our own faith and critically examine that as well as our culture, and to say, what are the messages that we hear about gender privilege that are internalized in our culture? Where do we see how gender bias, for instance, is just kind of taken like as that's what we practice in our faith? Like, how are some of those messages just accepted or internalized, and how and when and if they're even questioned? And so that really began, some of those questions began the writing that we did in our curriculum. And as it turns out, we wrote scenarios that reflected all of those types of the intersections of those three things: our faith, our background and culture, and the gender biases that are kind of just inherent in or accepted within our communities. And so that's something that is reflected in our curriculum. So we were, with Li Shun's experience and credibility within the community, we initially just got so much response, and we continue to get response from various faith communities in Los Angeles, but because of the pandemic also throughout the country, because we've pivoted to a virtual platform now with our training since 2020. But prior to that, we did have a couple of in-person trainings, and Shirley, if you want to show one of our pictures, you can. That was from one of our earliest trainings with a church that had a situation where an adult volunteer like a volunteer minister was sexually abusing one of the teens. And, you know, it became it really rocked the faith community. And as a result, you know, thankfully the teen came out on the person who is doing the harm, and he's actually behind bars right now. But it tore the church community apart. And so the leaders, the paid minister left. Actually, both of them left. There are two paid ministers who left. And left here, as you see in the top picture, are the volunteer leaders who act as elders of the church community. And you see Lishan in the bottom left. We were training together at that time, the leadership on, how do API churches respond to domestic and sexual violence? And we can, it was really kind of getting them away from the binary solutions of do nothing and sweep it under the rug, or call the police and then it's off of our hands. And so we were really trying to hold dialogues and conversations about, what are some of the internal strengths that you have within the faith community? What are some of the values around wanting to keep this a sacred and safe space for everybody? How do you keep people accountable, and who keeps people accountable within the faith community? And so to date, we have trained since, I guess, we kicked off our trainings at the end of 2019. So in the last 3 years, we've trained over 15 churches, immigrant API churches and seminaries, some seminaries approximately 200 immigrant faith leaders. There's one community in API, it's more of an Asian American community out in Maryland that we trained, and that had more, English speaking Americanized, like second gen APIs, but the vast majority of those trained in our 2-day training have been this is a good representation. The photos are like older, monolingual Taiwanese or Mandarin speaking faith leaders. So that's a little bit about our project. Alicia, do you want to add some more?
No, thanks. That's enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellen. I love what you shared about kind of I'm trying to stop sharing my screen. There it goes. Okay. I love what you shared about kind of your background and how you got started and why it felt like such a, a natural way for your journey to proceed, and that kind of very genuine, coming up from the, your parents as a plumber and as a pastor. That sort of social work you can see is very deeply rooted in your work, and also probably in the work of a lot of, advocates and faith-based, members of the faith-based community that we know, just like the different hats. And I also love what you shared about trying to get away from the 0 to 100. You either do nothing or you do maybe too much in some cases, and really seeing the nuances of different situations and different responses and different approaches to healing. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to pass the mic now to Sunny from the Korean American Family Services to share about their work.
Thank you. I have my 10-minute watch on. I don't go over 10 minutes, but yes. Hi, my name is Sunny Kim. I am Gender-Based Violence Program Manager at KFAM, Korean American Family Services. So before I talk about our project, let me just briefly tell you about KFAM and what we do. So we are founded back in 1983, and since then, we've been providing social services to Korean immigrant families with a mission to support and strengthen Korean American families and individuals in the greater Los Angeles area. We do specialize in culturally and linguistically sensitive services that address the needs of vulnerable and underserved Korean immigrant families. And about 6,000 adults and children receive services from us each year. We do have 4 different departments, including mental health department, Asian foster family initiative, child and wellness department, and gender-based violence department. So I'm not going to talk about each department, what they do, because I do think their names are pretty self-explanatory. But at gender-based violence department, we do provide culturally responsive services to Korean immigrant survivors of gender-based violence, including case navigation, clinical counseling, support group, whatever that is needed, or financial support that is needed for our survivors to overcome barriers. Yeah, I think about 90% of our survivors are monolingual Korean immigrant women. On the prevention side, we work very closely with Korean community in order to tackle stigma and shame around gender-based violence, and also to increase awareness around it. Just to tell you briefly about Korean cultures around gender-based violence. Korean culture is very patriarchal and male dominant culture. So traditionally, women are expected to take care of their family by being a good mother, by being being good wives. When men are expected to, like financially support their families and serve as a head of the family, making important decisions, basically giving a full control and power to men. I feel like a lot has changed as our society has changed over time, but a lot of Korean immigrants, especially older adults, came to the United States with the traditional Korean culture stereotype. So how I see our Korean immigrant community in the United States, or at least in LA, is that they tend to be more traditional and patriarchal compared to Koreans living in Korea. So and big part of our prevention work is to work with faith leaders or faith communities. There are many reasons, but 2 big reasons are first, it's accessibility. So according to one study, about 70% or a little more than 70% of Korean immigrants reported to attend church regularly. And nowadays, church serve our community not only as a place of worship, but also as a community center because all the resources that each church has with their congregants. So by educating faith leaders, we knew that we were going to be able to reach out to more people in our community. And second reason is that oftentimes, oftentimes faith leaders serve as first responders. At least that is what I saw. So a lot of Korean immigrant women, they prefer to talk and share about their abuse to their faith leaders, other than organizations like us. I mean, it could be because they didn't know about us, or it could be because they felt more comfortable because of the trust and respect that was built with their towards their leaders. And sadly, unfortunately, a lot of faith leaders didn't know how to handle DBSA. So some of them, they just didn't know what to do, right? Or they approach domestic violence as a family matter. So for example, like, let's pray, we have to keep the family together, and forgive your husband, or something like that, which caused more harm to survivors, right? Also, we've seen a lot of victim blaming. So we thought it made a lot of sense for us to educate faith leaders and faith community, or at least for faith leaders to better serve survivors as a first responder. KFAM has been with this project for about 3 years now. First year, we really focused on training faith leaders in domestic violence with different trainings, including 40-hour DV training, 2-day retreat for female clergies, and also YouTube series on domestic violence. Actually, we came up with this YouTube video idea because of pandemic. Anyways, first year, we were able to train total 339 faith leaders, well, including 300 views on YouTube videos. Usually we do, for our 40-hour DB training, we do train about 25 faith leaders. Knowing that having 300 people watching our DB education video was huge. And of course it was appropriate because of pandemic, right? And as we trained our faith leaders, we saw that a lot of our faith leaders had very negative attitudes towards sexual assault survivors. So second year, we got this idea from a YouTube video series. We produced 2 YouTube videos on sexual assault just for Korean faith leaders, Christian faith leaders. So this time we filmed 2 videos with 3 members of our Korean Faith Advisory Council, and total 320 people watched our videos. So through these videos, we were able to talk about what sexual assault is and usually how sexual assault happens in Korean faith community. And also we were able to talk about how church prevents sexual assault in our community or in their congregants as well. And also this year, not only video, we created this evaluation tool so that for our training events or whatever, so that we could create a tool to really get objective feedback and also be able to update our curriculums regularly. Finally, this year, we really wanted to focus on creating education curriculum for faith leaders on healthy relationships, so that they could use them when they see couples for counseling. So during our meeting, we have a monthly meeting with our council members. During our meeting, one of our members, they shared that how faith leaders were more about creating healthy family and a healthy relationship. So we really wanted to try that out. So actually, I'm meeting with our advisory committee tomorrow to go over the final version of it. But it's been really great. So besides this event, we constantly met with Korean Faith Advisory Council in order to basically do everything with them. So KFAC, Korean Faith Advisory Council, is a group of faith leaders who work as a bridge between KFAM and Korean faith communities. So they work very closely with us to go over our materials so that they could give them a feedback from the faith leader land, and also helped us with recruiting faith leaders and just plan events as well. And they have been a great support for this project as well. And okay. So it's been really great for us to be able to work with faith leaders under this project, and we were really able to create tangible materials that is appropriate for with whatever is happening. And we were actually able to reach out to a lot of faith leaders through this. So I am really excited for this work and this project, and I'm also excited to continue this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. That's quite a lot of successes and accomplishments, and it sounds like a very long-term, slow, and sometimes patient process of building trust with the faith leaders. And kind of, it sounds like you continue to check in with them and kind of pivot as you see, as you learn things about their needs and their trends, and your evaluation tool, and kind of keep checking in with them to pivot as needed. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I know that you have some of the project components and videos available publicly. I know a lot of them are in Korean only, but I'm sure some of our audience would love to hear and see them if you want to drop them in the chat. The name of Sunhee's organization, to answer the question in the chat, is Korean American Family Services, KFAM. So thank you, Sunhee. And then let's hear from Harmeet, our last, but obviously not least, just last in the order of today, to share about your work at the Sikh Family Center.
Yes, thank you, Shirley, and thank you for our my other co-panelists. It's really nice and humbling to hear from you all and your experiences and how difficult it is to do this work, especially the work in the faith institutions, and to not give up. So I'm here with the Sikh Family Center. My name is Harmeet Kaur with the Sikh Family Center. And Shirley, do you want to put up the slides? Yeah, I just want to share a little bit of information regarding the organization. If you're not familiar with what we do, we are a national nonprofit organization and a grassroots organization as well. We have 3 main program areas with a focus on gender justice. Our first main program areas are violence prevention and education, where we create and disseminate community-centered and multi-generational bilingual resources in Punjabi and English and programming. So one of the resources is our family violence resource guide for Gurdwaras, and that's what I'll be focusing on. And it's a big part of our the API Institute's support that we received through this project. And our other major program area is our intervention services, which includes our national helpline. Yes, slide 2 is fine. And our national helpline includes our national helpline is free, it's private, it's non-emergency, and we have culturally responsive peer support. So our peer counselors, they respond in a very trauma-centered way. We offer referrals based on individuals' needs, including issues ranging from family violence, mental health, sexual assault, and such. And our last major program areas are outreach and training. So while we recognize how difficult it is, or even sometimes the traditional organizations aren't equipped to support the unique needs of the Sikh community or other communities of color, that's where we really step in and try to offer training and technical assistance to our non-Sikh partners on to how to better serve the Sikh community as well. And the next slide, it just actually shows you what our major project was our family violence resource guide for Gurdwaras. And when I say Gurdwara, this is an image of what a Gurdwara looks like. And a Gurdwara, the literal meaning is it's a place of learning. It's a place of worship where the community comes together. And in Sikhism itself, there is no hierarchy of clergy. So in the English words or terms like priest don't necessarily represent or accurately represent the proper meaning in Sikhism. And so there are going to be a few terms that I want to just provide basic definitions for, because I'll be using them throughout and talking about our project. And they better describe our particular traditional roles that take place in the Sikh Gurdwara. Sevadars, for example, are people who are hired or volunteer in a Gurdwara. Granthis and Patis, those who do a lot of the spiritual work. There's also the board of the Gurdwara. So these are the folks that do the hiring, they manage the money, they put up policies, and also run the institution itself, the building and maintaining and maintenance as well. So that they're also recognized as committee members. And prior to doing this project, I want to share a little bit of background. Like our work with Gurdwaras, it was in varying capacities before we initiated and started to do more in getting them involved in providing support for survivors of violence. So for example, we spent several years in the last decade, right, building trust, building credibility with the community and nurturing those relationships. We had volunteers who did tabling events. I was one of the volunteers too initially. I would go out and put out, flush out domestic violence, like flyers in discrete spaces like bathrooms. And at times they would be taken down, and I would also go back and put them back up, get them back up. And we've also had teen college readiness workshops at the Gurdwara spaces. And the workshops were incorporating bits about preparing for new relationships, recognizing unhealthy relationship dynamics, and also how to support teens if they were experiencing resources, if they were experiencing youth dating violence or teen dating violence. And at the same time, we had Gurdwaras, sevadars and leaders who were referring survivors to us through our helpline or in person when we were out doing these tabling events, right? We work alongside Gurdwaras to make sure that they were connected to resources if they were trying to make these referrals, but also these sevadars connected directly with like domestic violence shelters. They help them make accommodations for survivors and provide that tools and education. So if somebody was coming in and they were wearing their articles of faith, they knew, what do those articles of faith look like? How can we work with a survivor to ensure that, yes, they're safe, but also that they're able to practice their faith. And this slide at the bottom, based on our experience and the years of work that we've done, we know we had a lot of hope that, Gurdwaras can commit to taking small, firm steps that are safer and consistent. And in the next slide, it highlights a little bit more about like, how do we start it off with our project? So we had various Gurdwara sevadars, volunteers and staff members within the Gurdwara. They were interviewed between March and September of 2020 to help us prepare for developing the guide, the toolkit. And these sevadars, what we ended up doing was we began conducting individual listening sessions with them where we're asking them directly, how can we get other Gurdwaras involved? So remember, these are sevadars that we worked with in the past. We had good rapport with them. What was missing? What's missing in this equation when we're trying to make sure that safety is a priority for survivors? What more can be done to ensure that there's consistency in those steps? And what do you need as faith leaders who are being approached by survivors? What can we do to help? So we were able to connect with sevadars from different parts of the country, and this allowed us to really capture a diverse scope of experiences. Some who worked with survivors, some who said that, we're just not equipped, we're not trained. And we learned that we did, of course, these were during COVID, so we did a lot of these in person, but we learned that often individual survivors who were coming to Gurdwaras, they felt like there was a lack of assistance because their or even violence prevention training. So they didn't know how to respond accurately. They don't know like what to say to them and how to prevent further harm from happening, right? They don't know we weren't expecting them to have all the answers, but we wanted to make sure that they at least have resources to support when a survivor or a victim was approaching them with for help, because the truth is that families, they really needed their help in protecting their safety and their lives, and they had hope that coming to a Gurdwara, coming to their place of worship, was going to ensure that. And at times that happened, and at times it didn't, because they felt like they weren't equipped to be able to respond. So it only, based on our experience and what we learned from doing these listening exercises, it only solidified our resolve to continue to create a consistent toolkit, a consistent guide that had these simple steps that folks would, or that these Gurdwara sevadars and leaders would be willing to take. And the next few slides I share, this is what the toolkit looks like. And in the summer of 2020, in the middle of doing these these listening sessions with them, we learned that there was an incident of murder-suicide in the community where a mother and child was shot by an abusive partner who then killed himself. And we share stories like this when we do engage with the Gurdwaras as well. And this has really allowed us to really push this resource. And I'm going to share a little bit of like what specific asks we had of the Gurdwara. And before I shared, what were the levels of the Gurdwara in terms of those who volunteer, those who are doing the worship, the spiritual work, and then those who then run and hire the Gurdwara, run the Gurdwara building, and then hire and are charged. And those are the committee members. From the committee, we asked specifically, they agree on a standard protocol to use when responding to a community member who's seeking help. So a community member who is a survivor of violence. And the second ask was to share some basic principles, some guiding principles and reliable resources with each and every Sevadar employee, so that when we're engaging at each level, we're engaging with the community members, we're engaging with the Sevadars who oftentimes are the ones that the community always sees. They might be somebody at in the building that they know that they're always there every Sunday. So sometimes they're approaching them, and we want to make sure that through taking these specific steps, they're able to engage and know what to do and how to respond. In the next slide, this is one of the first guiding principles that we ask. So in the slide itself, it shares, do no harm. So gurdwaras, they should take action with following 2 guiding principles, keeping these 2 guiding principles in mind to make sure that everyone at the gurdwara knows and commits to these principles. So knowing that it's not their fault, saying that out loud to a victim, they don't have to know what to do, but at least sharing that there are options, that they should keep information private. It shouldn't go around to other folks because it's something very personal that the survivor is coming to them and trusting them with this information. And also not to make promises that they cannot keep. For example, promises to fix their situation. And instead, we give them tools and what they should say. So the thought bubbles are some examples of what they should say. This sounds very difficult and dangerous. You have options. You're not alone. Family violence is a very serious thing. So those are some examples of what we incorporate in the guide. And the next slide, it shows our second guiding principle, which is do not turn anyone away empty-handed. And this is basically what they can actually do, right? Like if they're not aware of resources themselves, the Sevadars and PAISABs, what they can do is fill out this family safety resource card. And we offer support to help them fill out this information. So if somebody's approaching them and they have a copy of this card, they have this up on their bulletin, we can help them fill out the local domestic violence agency, the local legal aid services that are available. And they can at least provide this information to someone that's asking for services without thinking like, oh, I don't know where, what resources exist. And this is also true for those who might, who are willing to take responsibility for their actions and they want to create change, and we want to give them opportunities to receive services as well. So the person causing harm can also access services, and we want to make sure that was highlighted in the guide as well. So that could be including somebody who is dealing with past traumas or existing diseases, right? Like alcoholism, mental health, or substance abuse as well. So this goes making sure that they have a list of resources available and handy. They can easily take a picture of this and share it with the individual that's approaching them. And they can also, put this up on a bulletin, like I'd mentioned. The next slide, it goes is one example of one of our volunteers who shared her experience with working with the Gurdwara. And our strategy for doing this outreach was one, identifying warm contacts. So similar to knowing like somebody who had a connection at the Gurdwara. So it could be somebody who's a part of the board or part of the committee, or somebody that does like volunteer seva or services at the Gurdwara. And if the community member has a warm contact, they can facilitate that connection with the Gurdwara member, and we're more likely to then engage with them. So once we identify warm contacts, we mail hard copies of the guide, and then that community member can then engage in that conversation with them. That engagement then includes like taking hard copies to the guide and going through like page by page, making them more comfortable with engaging with the information so they know what to do, what steps to take, helping them fill out their family safety resource cards, taking hard copies of those as well so they can put them up on their bulletin boards. And this experience that I have here in the quotes, she explains that, I recently presented our family violence resource guide and facilitated discussion about its implementation with the Gurukar's board. And Gurukar is another term another term for Gurdwara. What was essential was that the predominantly male board opened up to engage actively and agreed that when I reiterated that they must not wait for 2 women on the board to champion this cause, the men need to speak up and be at the forefront of presenting resources and showing Gurdwara commitment. Domestic violence is not a women's issue because it often involves men. We need men to speak up and against this form of violence. And we appreciate each time a Gurdwara board appreciates the seriousness of this issue and accepts their own responsibility to their Sangat. Sangats means community. And so this was another strategy that we used to highlight that, this work is getting done. It is reaching the Gurdwaras. We are offering training. We are taking that initial step, but we are expecting some level of accountability, right? So we are following up with the Gurdwaras. We had a gender justice intern who really spearheaded outreach of the Gurdwara Guide in her home state, and she engaged with 15 Gurdwaras alone in her home state, where she created a video to encourage youth, other allies, and other Gurdwaras to just get involved and make sure that they're taking steps towards safety for survivors. The outcomes of the projects were very positive. There were some Gurdwaras who made announcements about Sikh family center to their community during a congregation. We had flyers put up in common spaces so people had access to the resources, not just a family safety resource card, but other specific flyers that are centered for survivors, sharing statistics from our needs assessment surveys, tearaway flyer that had tearaway, our helpline numbers, so people knew, how they can engage with both community-specific resources and those resources outside the community. We offered introductory trainings, and those trainings included, specifically for internal Gurdwara, leadership, but to help build their knowledge around family violence. What are myths and facts about family violence that we often hear in the community, and what are the truths, what are the facts about family violence that we can kind of share and make sure that you're not engaging or responding to survivors with misinformation as well. What kind of impact, long-term impact does it have on the community, showing them that avenue as well to make sure that they understand the seriousness of the issue. And lastly, the last slide, it just highlights what we've been doing in 2022. We continue to push outreach and community education and training. We're reaching more Gurdwaras and doing that follow-up and accountability. We're doing trainings that includes, again, what I was mentioning before, but now incorporating videos. So these videos are in Punjabi. We have a playlist of videos. Some of them include it takes 2 hands to clap. This is the US, not Punjab. If she really wanted to leave, she could. And sharing, some facts related to them understanding that, it does take 7 to 8 times for a victim survivor to leave. And though that's information that they just don't have or they're just not aware of. So we want to make sure that we take that extra step moving forward and continue to push those conversations through these videos. They're available on our YouTube channel as well. And they provide, again, a way to make these conversations more mainstream, not just for Gurdwaras, but for those who want to engage with their faith communities and they just don't know how to go about it or where to start. And this is one way to show that, there is work being done towards this, and then they have a responsibility to ensure that they are doing more to make sure that survivors feel safe and they feel that there are resources available to them. Yeah, and the last slide is just a way to get in touch. I just want to say thank you to the Institute for allowing us to, participate in this project as well, but also making it possible for us to take it one step further. Yeah.
Thank you, Harmeet, for sharing. I mean, you talked about it all very quickly, but it really sounds like very time-intensive, labor-intensive work, physically sometimes going to the bathrooms and putting up the flyers and then putting them back up when they're taken down, community tabling and going, page by page by page with the, the leaders to make sure it's understood. A lot of, sweat, hard work has been put into your project and, all the projects. So, now that we've heard kind of an overview and some successes from each of the projects, we are going to move into a small question and answer from with the bulk of our time remaining. I'm just going to pose some questions and then feel free to just unmute yourselves and, just jump right in. And for the participants, please keep your questions coming in the chat box or in the Q&A. If you leave it in the chat box, that's fine too. So the first question, I think I talked about this a little bit at the beginning and you've all shared But is there anything you want to add to, you know, in our work that we all do to address gender-based violence in AAPI communities or in immigrant communities? Why is it so important for domestic violence and sexual assault agencies and faith institutions to be on the same page and to work collaboratively to support survivors?
I guess I can share, and I think I did talk a lot about this earlier during our overview of our programs, but I mean, faith institutions, they're like how I shared, they're deeply rooted in our community and have huge influence to our community. And also there's like a respect that's already built towards faith leaders. So when we work with faith institutions and faith leaders, we can have better impact in our community. And I mean, besides this, I think there are a lot more reasons why it is important for our agency, DBSA agencies like us to work with the community. But ultimately, I think it is all because of safety of survivors. You know, we want to make our community safer for our survivors, like, you know, to come out and to share and to speak up and to ask for help, right? And I think faith institutions, faith communities can actually help us creating that space for survivors within our community. So as an agency, we work very hard to create a sense of safety for our survivors. But in real world, there are so many things that we cannot control in our community. And it is all about working with community and actually working with faith community or faith institution is part of that, I believe.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I just wanted to add that faith institutions can also play a role in prevention, because families are sort of a direct contact, right, with the faith leaders. So if they see that somebody might be struggling or they're with varying traumas like family violence, faith institutions can be more equipped to directing them, providing information and acting as a bridge with other organizations so that they can access information. And also taking away shame of seeking these services too, and encouraging them to take steps towards safety.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And then I would also add that, you know, it's pretty common for survivors to turn to faith leaders if they are involved with the faith community prior to actually seeking help from law enforcement or from social work agencies or even DV agencies. And so I think for faith communities to be aware of the resources that DVSA agencies can offer is pretty critical, so that they can expand their options for what they can offer survivors. The other thing that Lee, Shun, and I have found is that as we've expanded our trainings from just locally here in SoCal to to nationally, since we've converted our 2-day trainings to virtual, is that a lot of the faith communities, immigrant Taiwanese and Mandarin speaking ones in the Midwest, have found themselves that within monolithic communities where the faith community becomes the one stop for everything. So when someone who isn't involved with the faith community comes across troubles or comes across crisis, they may not have that kind of resource in language, but then they know of the faith community who speaks their own language. And so they go to the faith community with those issues. And it's something that, you know, my parents, like I said, themselves have experienced personally, pastoring an immigrant church, but then that is still the case for, especially if they're like, you know, the pastor from Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, like in a suburb outside of Columbus, was telling me they get everybody, you know, who come to them with different struggles, and hoping that the faith community can offer support and resources and solutions.
Thank you all. Yeah, so I think you all, you know, put it very articulately about how, especially for immigrant communities or communities that are new to the U.S. or, you know, who speak a language, a different dominant language than English, involvement in faith is such a big part of their life and such a big part of the support that they have. And, you know, it's not just a faith community, like you pointed out, Ellen, it's, you know, it's language, it's culture, it's, you know, like Harmeet said, it's prevention, it's community wellness, and, you know, social wellness, and it's leaving a huge part of their lives out if we're not, you know, doing what we can to help build the capacity of faith leaders to respond to DV and SA as well. So let me move on to our second question, which is, you know, I think you all have a lot of experience in doing this work already for the past couple of years, and I know we have some in the participants who maybe have worked with faith communities also, it seems like. But for those who are maybe looking to start a faith project or looking to engage more in this area, what are some ways that DVSA agencies or advocates can build the trust with faith leaders or with their faith institutions, especially in the cases where they may feel like their values are being challenged? You know, the values of the faith community may be challenged by our movement.
I think one of the ways that DV and SA organizations can build trust is to show up as listeners, honoring the community's wisdom as well, their history and understanding, and doing their research, being prepared to be uncomfortable, and being transparent. It's important to know, for the faith leaders to know, what are your intentions if you're coming into their space? You know, why are you here? What can you offer to faith institutions? Is there a way that you can talk about these issues without, because they are very sensitive, right? So is there a way that you can talk about them and make it clear that they are intentional, and be mindful of your approach when you do step into that space? And, you know, one way that we've done that is maybe focusing on healthy relationship dynamics, and thinking about the impact of children, the long-term and intergenerational impact that trauma can have, and also making the information accessible in languages that speak to the community, not literal translations, but ways that the community can understand, hey, this is something that was made for me, with me in mind. And you can work with the faith leaders to create that tool or that resource and disseminate that information with their support.
Yes, I want to agree everything that Hermie said, and also validation is a big piece. You know, I think it is important for us as an organization to validate their work. You know, actually, I mean, the approach might be a little different, but you know, they are also working hard for families, right? And I think it is important for us to validate their hard work, and on top of that, it is also important to remind them that we are working for the same thing, working for the same purpose, for the same cause. It could be healthy relationship, or even our safety of survivors, right? I think it is really important for us to create this partnership or alliance with the faith leaders, and they have to be able to understand that our work is not that different from what they're doing. And also for us, I think it's been really helpful to provide practical support. So from my experience, there are quite a lot of church or faith leaders who wanted a practical consultation or specific situation. So I think supporting faith institution or faith leaders with specific issues, you know, it really helped us to build trust, one-on-one trust, which expanded later on. And also lastly, you know, patient. Being patient is really important, because I mean, it is not easy to build a relationship and community, and a lot of barriers are placed ahead of us. But I think it is really important for us to show up and continue our work and continue to be patient.
一阵我来讲一个你翻译吼，我感觉这个问题就是咱甲这个community 的迄个信任嘛吼，甲关系吼。特别我感觉咱这个机构真好，就是咱咧讲的是信用文化甲 gender 三个绑做伙吼。特别咱大家若咧讲的时阵吼，我会记得讲，咱甲这个信用的团体吼，你会记得咱大家拢讲 拢会为一个圣经来讲，迄个他玛哈嘛，按咱的代志吼。啊，这个church leader 因听到就感觉讲，哦，真正这毋是这个问题，毋是即马这个社会的问题，真正古早就有啊。所以用这个信仰的方面来甲因接触的时阵，因就会感觉讲，哎哟，哪会安尼？因较会 pay attention 安尼啦。我感觉讲，这就是咱用信仰文化甲 gender 三个这个combination 做伙时阵，因会足爱听的安尼。OK。
So Lishan was just sharing about how really agreeing with what Harmeet and Senhia had already said, but relationships and credibility with the faith communities that you're approaching is really important. One of the things that we have seen is that when you come in as an outsider, if you haven't already established credibility or you don't have an existing relationship with that faith community, learning how to connect what that faith community is already doing with the issues that you are trying to create dialogue about is really critical. And so example that Lishan pointed to is that in our curriculum, when we took a deep dive into like our faith, what we drew from was actually sacred scripture and taking a look at how, you know what, there's actually stories of sexual assault buried in the Bible, and nobody really ever talks about them. And we don't unpack it and talk about what is the impact of them. But when we open up our trainings with talking about, hey, let's look at this sacred scripture and why is this story here? And what are the consequences of when this happened, right? Within a historical, like this historical story, what does that teach us about, you know, sexual assault in our current climate? You know, it's not that removed from us when we think about, well, here we are, we're the church, we only talk about certain things, and sexual assault, we don't talk about them, but that's actually in your scripture, like that's all actually in your sacred scripture. Like, how come you aren't talking about that? So kind of making that connection for that, bridging it so that they are like, oh, okay, that's a moment of reflection. The other thing is that I guess I don't think I can overemphasize what Harmeet was saying earlier about coming to faith communities as a listener. And so in our introduction to our training guide, which is, I think the Institute has it if folks want to see, is that we made a caveat that unlike trainings that maybe DV and SA agencies do in the hopes that you're delivering education or you're hoping to change people's ideas or minds, that the guide is really meant to engage faith leaders within their context. So that means being prepared to listen deeply to views that may feel very antithetical to your own views on topics such as marriage and divorce and gender roles, the role of law enforcement, the role of faith communities, just to name a few topics that I think can be triggering for people when they think about faith communities if you're not involved in one. And so I think I've been, the nonprofit I was with, the DVSA org that I was with, I think it was very common to hear my coworkers feel very uncomfortable with approaching a faith community because, you know, their idea of that faith community is that, well, they don't accept this or they don't accept that. And so they're already going into that, faith community with, kind of walls up about them. And so it really does take being open, being willing to listen in order to establish that kind of credibility and relationship with the faith leaders, as Lishan had talked about earlier.
Thank you all. Yeah, so I heard, approaching with humility, being willing to listen, but also showing up and not just assuming that we have all the answers. We as the, the DVSA side of things, or as the, the advocates, not just showing up and saying, well, this is how we're going to do things and we're not listening to you, but really kind of allowing it to be a mutual relationship. And also focusing on common ground, right? Common values, common hopes, and common. We all want to support communities. How can we find the common ground in that? That's just some of what I've heard you all name. So if I can ask, what are some of the biggest challenges or hurdles that you've had to overcome in this work? And how have you done so?
I can go first. I was kind of waiting to see if any one of you wants to go first, but I guess I can go first. So there are so many challenges, to be honest. I mean, I can't stop just talking about challenges and challenges, but I'm just gonna say a couple. I guess first one is I'm not gonna lie, there are a lot of issues that faith leaders and we can't agree on. So for example, LGBTQ plus issues around LGBTQ plus community is something that our faith leaders do not talk about. You know, and not only that about divorce, and when it comes to divorce and safety and well-being of children, it's just like there's a lot of issues played as a barrier for us. So what we did was, instead of challenging their beliefs, we identified something that we could all agree on and focused on that. So for example, with LGBTQ, instead of talking about whether it is right or wrong, we focused that there were LGBTQ survivors and their rights also needed to be protected. And also that the survivors in the community, they also need they are in need of services. So that is something that they were okay. They were able to agree and they were able to see that. So we kind of focused on that and expanded through that, and that was less challenging for us. So whenever there's like a challenging topic that that we had hard time processing, we find the area that we could all agree on, and we started from there. So that was one of the tactics that we used. And also, the second challenge that I could think of is lack of interest. I think Ellen shared a little bit that it's hard to build a relationship with there's no relationship built already. And a lot of faith leaders, especially male leaders, they didn't really see why they had to be educated in DFSA, because they were so into ministry, right? They were so into growing their ministry, so DFSA was something that had nothing to do with them. So for us, our way of addressing that was to give a specific examples and talk about intersectionality between DFSA and faith community and how they could play a role, and also creating materials and curriculum tailored for specific faith community was also helpful, since they could actually use them for their ministry. So for our YouTube video material, it's DV education video, sexual assault education video, but they are tailored to faith leaders. And our title is domestic violence education for faith leaders and sexual assault education for faith leaders. So we tailored our material and examples, all the examples and everything was tailored for the specific group. So I think it was also helpful, and that they were able to see that, oh, maybe I need this. Maybe I think I need to be, I need to take this. I need to participate in this event. So I think the connection, building a connection and bridge was also important for us. That's how we did approach and address the challenges that we faced.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we faced was because we have gurdwaras across the country. We have over 250 gurdwaras across the country, and our goal with the toolkit of guide and right now with our outreach, yes, that's what we're hoping to do, but there isn't consistency in the type of response that we're receiving, right? So when we are engaging with conversations and talking about the sensitive issue or sharing an example that this might happen, that there are murder suicides happening, that this is a serious issue, we're not necessarily getting buy-in. There is pushback in some spaces where, you know, they're telling us, and these are male-dominated spaces. So when our volunteers are going out and saying, you know, they feel like this outcome wasn't successful, because I spoke with somebody and they said that, oh, this doesn't happen at all. Well, we remind them. And so we're engaging with our volunteers and just encouraging them as a way to kind of continue to push back and share at least like resources, like our videos as a tool to provide education and training without directly getting involved with, you know, the Gurdwara committee members, if that makes sense. So still sharing those resources so they can watch it on their own time, and then still leaving that door open so they can continue to engage with us if and when that rises. And sadly, those who initially said that, oh no, this doesn't happen, well, then all of a sudden there's cases that they are noticing and stuff, and then they're reaching out to us in urgency. There's a crisis, right? Because they're going in crisis mode. Now they're no longer prepared, or the training and stuff that they were hoping they'd get, they didn't get that training, and now they kind of are reaching out to us in hopes that they can do more to try to engage. So initial hurdle was the buy-in, communicating with our volunteers who are then going in to communicate with the Gurdwaras, and trying to overcome that challenge has been continuing that conversation and leaving that door open. So maybe today, you know, they don't want to listen, but maybe a few months down the line, they know that these resources exist, and so they can access them whenever they're ready, and that we're not turning, just because they said no once doesn't mean we're going to stop doing this work and continue pushing forward.
我来分享一下吼，在咱咧training的中间吼，有2间教会是已经发生代志，所以安尼紧张甲就讲啊，咱需要这个 training 吼，要安怎组织教会这个会当做一个 safety place 安尼嘛吼。后来咧，迄个社牧师因遐吼，因就是嘛是当时旧年有发生一个咱华人中间的一个代志。这牧师听到伊就足安尼嘛，足咧想讲教会莫受到伤害安尼吼。所以你会记得后来怎因联合六间教会做伙吼。所以我感觉讲，这个是真好的一个，咱为这个看起来无好的代志中间吼。会当大家教会开始会当注意这件代志，我感觉这嘛是一个真好的 challenge 安尼。OK。
So the timing, just what Lishan was saying, was that the timing of when we had launched the trainings at the end of 2019, early 2020, right before the pandemic, was really timely, because here in the LA area, there were 2 pretty big cases that were in media, at least within the Taiwanese Mandarin speaking community, of sexual assault within churches. And so churches were really kind of motivated and alerted to the fact that this is happening in our community. They never want to say, oh, it happens in the church, or it happens within Taiwanese or Chinese communities. Like, I think they always think it happens to another community. So this training or these conversations are not relevant to us. However, you know, unfortunately, these were live and going on at that time when we started the training. And so it was kind of addressing churches who were worried about, you know, it happening within their own churches, and the fallout that would ensue after something as big like that would happen in the public eye. But I guess the good that came out of it was that a lot of churches wanted to learn more about the issue. They wanted to get more resources and support around the issue so that they could hopefully prevent, though, you know, is that really being able to prevent, but just at least learn more about it. There was one pastor in particular a third church who had another issue around sexual assault again with a youth, a minor, and because of it, he was able to rally without, you know, Lishan and I even asking, 6 other churches within the community who are all immigrant Taiwanese and Chinese speaking churches to come together for they didn't do the full two-day training, but they came together for kind of a short Q&A, and we were able to pass on more information to them about next steps and being able to sign up for the training.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ellen, for interpreting for Lishan. I just want to uplift this question in the chat because it's kind of pertaining to what you just spoke about, Ellen, about how would you advocate for a survivor whose abuser is connected socially with people who hold positions of power in the faith institution familiar to them. So you addressed this a little bit already, but if you have any other insight.
So it's really interesting because like one thing that we've had to really remind the faith leaders that we've gone to is that they themselves hold so much positional power within their faith community that what they say can really like affect someone who is doing the harm within their community. And this is actually a real example. One of the first churches that we trained, they actually had a situation where within the same, like they call them small groups or life groups, where they meet outside of a Sunday and they just kind of like do life together. The wife had disclosed to the women in the group that she and her children were being physically harmed by the husband. And, you know, rather than calling the police or doing nothing, it was really interesting because as we had challenged the church about like, what could you do? Like, what could you do to keep that person accountable? They call them brothers, but like the other men of that small group actually went, when they found out, they went to this husband's home and had a conversation with him about it and say like, that's not what we do here. You know, and that at its very basic form, I feel like is community accountability, because it's not asking me or Lishan to go in and talk to this guy who doesn't even know us. We have no relationship or credibility with him, but it's actually the people within the community who hold the person of harm accountable. And even more so, we express to the faith leaders, like, you have the ability to speak from the pulpit. You have the ability to say from the front that this is not acceptable in our community, right? And this is why, you know, when we look at, you know, our sacred writings or our scripture, this is what it's based on, you know? And so I think that if we, you know, sometimes we get entangled in, you know, reporting or, you know, this is going to reflect badly on our community. But when we've done our trainings, it's actually been so refreshing to hear the faith leaders say, well, we would engage this person. We would talk to him. We would, if he's not part of the faith community, but the wife is, we would invite the husband to one of our outings, you know, and do something with him so we can build a relationship with him. And hopefully he would change. And so I think it's been so refreshing stepping away from a DVSA org that says like, we want nothing to do with a person of harm. We don't engage him at all, to be with faith communities who are like, none of us is perfect. And we've all done really crappy things before. And yet we believe in the power that God can change people. Like there is good in us and that people can change. And so we would engage him and hopefully see if he would be willing to build relationship with us and come to see that some of the things that he's doing is not okay. So that's not a short-term solution. That's really more of a long-term investment in the people who are part of our community. So I think that's kind of a longish answer, but just want to put that out there, community accountability.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything you, either Sunny, Harmeet, or Lishan wanted to add to that question about holding somebody accountable who's in a position of power?
这个真重要，就是讲，咱拢会伫这个 training 的中间会甲这感觉讲教会吼，毋是牧师爱伫讲台顶爱讲这，你迄个主任学小组，你嘛爱讲安尼，因为你教会若有讲的时阵吼，下骹的迄个伊的信徒都会感觉讲啊，阮牧师有。阮牧师、阮教会、阮小组团契拢有注意即个问题，所以人心就会开，较敢讲安尼啦。Okay.
Lishan just wanted to also add that in addition to having like the pastor who is the face, you know, of leadership speaking about domestic violence and sexual assault from the front, that it also needs to be something that is then translated into conversations about DV and SA within small groups or Sunday school, like so that members or parishioners or visitors who come to this church know that this is an issue that they care about, and so that they are safe to disclose.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna move us along because we are running low on time, unfortunately. So this is actually my favorite question, and I'm sad that we don't have very long, so maybe in 2 minutes each, can you describe a case where you and a faith leader or a faith community worked together to respond to a survivor, and why that outcome was positive and constructive?
I shared a little bit about a similar experience where one of our very good volunteers, she took our family violence resource guide to our local Gurdwara, and she brought the hard copies with her with one of the main Gurdwara volunteers or sevadars, and his daughter was there to kind of help facilitate that meeting and arrange that meeting. And of course, when you see the guide, it's clear what the subject matter is and what the topic will be. So she began describing why it's important and why, there's statistics in the Sikh community that mimic those in the national DV field, that 1 in 4 women are impacted or are victims and survivors of violence. The gentleman, he started to laugh and he said, hey, this is a very progressive part of the country. The people who come to our Gurdwara are young, they're educated, and they're well off. This stuff doesn't happen here. We don't need this type of information here. It's not valid. But the volunteer, she was good. She got through the information, the steps from the guide. She said, hey, this is what I want to share with you regardless. And she outlined, what they can do. She helped them fill out the resource card with the information that if and when somebody does approach him or someone else at the Gurdwara, they are equipped with those tools and they can share that with the survivor. A few weeks later, this is a regular Gurdwara that our volunteer goes to. A few weeks later, he approaches her directly and says, I need to speak with you separately. He apologized to her for not listening. And in a very humbling tone, he said that he was shocked that there was a case at the Gurdwara. There was a survivor and he couldn't believe it. He said even though like his daughter was sharing information with him and seeing it with his own eyes really kind of set that message that like, yeah, more needs to be done. So he said, can you speak to her or can you share information with her? And our volunteer reminded him that, there are resources, there are tools that you can provide to the individual, like if and when she is ready. So not just like, okay, go, we don't want to go and engage with her if she's not asking for help, but he overheard a conversation and knew that something was going on. So he was more vigilant because of the knowledge that he was provided and the conversation he had it in his back of his mind. And just knowing like where to go and what to say, that was enough for him to get her connected to services and support. And so that just, just is an avid reminder why it's a very positive outcome. Was these conversations, yes, they take time, they take a lot of energy, and sometimes it can be very draining for even those who are doing this in person or virtually. But you have the power to change somebody's perspective. You have the power to impact, like create long-term impact. You might not see it the first day, you might not see it the next day, but somewhere along the line, somebody who is accessing or looking for services and they don't know where to go, you have given them the tools and provided them that assistance by going through this step or going through and doing this simple thing that we've asked, like is to fill up this information and make sure that it's accessible to somebody, because not everybody's going to be so forthcoming and say it out loud and say this is what I need, but they might be looking for that information, and it's very powerful coming from their own community, knowing that there are steps being taken to ensure that there are that everyone can be safe, really.
I could share one. So there was a church. Their main pastor, their head pastor, and his the wife. They were 40-hour trained, and so they were able to kind of see the survivors and their needs. And within their congregants, the DV survivor was identified. So what happened was that this pastor and this the pastor and their families immediately removed the children and the survivor from the abuser. And thankfully that church was big enough. So they had like a landlord, they had a businessman. So they were able to find the housing for this family. And also they were able to provide a job to her. So basically without DVSA organization involved, this church was able to support survivors on their own. And so it was really great to see that happening. So I think it was a really great example of church stepping up and serve this community and serve the survivors.
我来 share 一个吼，咱迄个单亲妈妈吼，伊去的教会就是 Tiffany 师母的教会嘛，这个 Tiffany 师母因教会因就拢有这个伫这个 training 内底安尼吼，所以呢，这个单亲妈妈伊就会甲 Tiffany 讲伊的查某囝互伊 ex husband 甲侵略嘛吼，所以呢，伊本来拢唔敢讲，唔知要去甲上讲，伊知影讲教会有咧 emphasize 即个代志，所以伊甲 Tiffany 师母讲，Tiffany 师母呢，就会甲咱，就会敲电话互我嘛吼，讲要安怎处理即个代志安尼嘛吼，所以我感觉讲后来呢，咱有甲安排去伫迄个 shelter 内底，所以因母仔囝拢足安全伫遐住，后来因嘛有即个律师咧处理即个案件安尼。
This is just an example that Li-Shin gave about a woman minister, Tiffany, Reverend Tiffany, who had gone through one of our trainings. And so she was alerted to the issue, and one of her congregants, who is a single mother, had visitations with her ex-husband, but the child was coming home disclosing things about that made the mom wonder about whether or not the daughter was being sexually assaulted. And so there's a lot of details about that I won't get into now, but effectively, because of our training with Reverend Tiffany and her church, Reverend Tiffany was able to loop back around and continue accessing us for additional support because of the relationship that Li-Shin and I had formed with them through the training, and because Reverend Tiffany had known Li-Shin also previously. So through like constant contact through line, that's something like, kind of using like messaging platforms to easily access support for the faith leaders themselves. Li-Shin was able to offer her resources to a local DV agency as well, where the single mom was able to get additional legal services.
Thank you all for sharing those really inspiring stories. I think a lot of times we do this work and then it's important to stop and think about the individual lives that we've touched and that we've impacted through this, through the tabling and the going through, the step-by-step and doing the evaluations and doing the training and all the little everyday things that lead to impacting a survivor's life and, getting the word out there that these things still happen in our communities and that everybody needs to be involved in being part of the solution. So thank you, all of you, first and foremost, for doing this work in your communities and being amazing, trailblazers, leaders. And then secondly, for taking the time out of that to be on this webinar with us today. I wish we had a lot more time than we do, because I think there's still some questions that we unfortunately didn't get a chance to address, and a lot of conversations that could be had, but we are out of time, and out of respect to your time, I didn't want to keep you on any longer. But if you are comfortable with it, feel free to share your contact information with everybody in the chat today, only if you want to. And for the participants, if you want to get in touch with these folks, please do so, or check out their KFAM and Sick Family Center's websites. Also, I want to share our evaluation survey today. Just take a few minutes to let us know how we did and different ways that we can improve, or other topics that you want to see future events on. There's a QR code there, or here is the link in the chat right that I just dropped right now, as well as my contact information if you want to get in touch with me. Other than that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. Take care, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, a lot of appreciations coming in. All right, have a good day, everyone.